I think a good school today doesn't necessarily meet the same definition as a good school 20 years ago. That a good school 20 years ago was constituted largely by high test scores. And while test scores remain important, increasingly today schools need to refocus from the sort of standardized curriculum, standardized experience, and begin to look more and more at learners. The good school of today, and I think even more of tomorrow, is a school that starts with the learner, that asks what the learner needs, and takes the learner forward regardless of whether they come from a family that has a history of formal education or have all the resources that we might wish they had. But that really good school today, and I think even more tomorrow, will be the school that focuses on the learner, that builds the learner's capacity to learn, not just their capacity to be taught, that spark in learners' curiosity and imagination and possibility, not just a focus on, can I get good grades? When the metrics start to change, and I think they are starting to change, we're asking different questions, we're holding different expectations of schools and of graduates than we did in the past. And Wisconsin has had pockets of innovation around this sort of redesign, and there's some really good profiles of schools within Wisconsin as a whole, and southeastern Wisconsin particularly, who've really thought deeply about how we develop the learner, not just how we train good students. And so I would say Wisconsin is competitive, but that's not saying much in terms of transforming the system. Most adults experience the traditional system, and it's hard for them to imagine a system that would be different from that. I mean, their idea was the teacher came in, the teacher told you what to do, you do what the teacher says, and if you do all that, good things happen. And that was a reasonable value proposition 20 years ago. It becomes less and less of a reasonable value proposition today. Today it's more a matter of what's the talent you have that I can develop? What is it that really interests you that I can tap to ensure that you learn what you need to learn, but in the middle of that I'm also capturing your imagination. I'm building a sense of purpose that allows you to become not just a well-trained worker, but a creative, creating worker who not only can do the job, but can create new ones. The challenge of becoming more competitive, I think, is both important and evolving. But among the drivers, I think, in that competition are one, that we commit to having all learners learn. The second is to go beyond the idea of we need to teach students the curriculum, to building in them the capacity to be learners, including in an independent situation. That the future is far from predictable, other than we know it's going to change rapidly. So simply giving students a set of facts or a cluster of information isn't adequate. That next level of preparing young people to be learners, not just students, is really an important element. And I think that represents a significant competitive advantage, not just for the schools, but for our state. That if we can prepare graduates who are flexible learners, who know how to learn when taught, but also know how to learn in situations that are far less clear, that are much murkier, we create now the opportunity to be competitive in an environment that's going to change, that's unpredictable.
The number one factor of determining family wealth in this state and in the country is whether or not you own a home. And so what we need to do in the public policy arena is to make sure we're doing everything possible to get new homes constructed, to get people to move into those homes, and to rebuild both the middle class and the housing economy and the state's economy. If we're to build a stronger economy in the state, we need workers. We have a worker shortage now. If we're going to have employers create the jobs that we want in economic development, the primary priority for that is to house those workers. And they have to be able to be housed at all different levels of incomes and housing. And so this has to be a priority for the state of Wisconsin, or we're not going to get the economic growth we want, and we're not going to be able to retain or attract workers to the state because we simply don't have places for them to stay. So what are the causes for our affordable housing shortages? Well, first of all, it's supply. We simply don't have enough supply of houses in the marketplace. We're still about 55% of what we used to be pre-recession for buildable lots and for housing units in the state of Wisconsin. So we still haven't gotten back our capacity to build homes to keep up with our demand. So supply is a big issue. Construction costs are a big issue. That's both in materials that people need for building homes, but also on the labor side. The labor force that left during the recession hasn't really come back, and that's putting upward pressures on the cost of housing as well. And then there's land use policies. Across the state of Wisconsin and municipalities and counties all over the state, we have different kinds of restrictive land use policies that have limited the supply of buildable lots, and that can come in many forms. It can be in the form of requiring large minimum lot sizes, which means builders have to build larger homes to be able to build in those kind of settings. And so restrictive land use policies are also one of the causes of our affordable housing in the state of Wisconsin. The urgency is a priority, I think. For the first time in all the years that I've been advocating for housing and real estate development, you see that all levels of government has said housing and affordable housing is a priority in the state of Wisconsin. And so to make that a priority, what has to happen? There are public policies that have to change at the state and the local level, but there's all kinds of agencies that work together, whether it's in land use, whether it's in construction, whether it's in taxes, whether it's in permitting. That happens at all levels of government. If we're going to produce the housing we need today, not 10 or 15 years ago, but the housing we need today, those public policy organizations have to get together to make housing a priority and to make sure that we have the housing there when the jobs are there.
In Waukesha County, we have a workforce problem. We don't have enough bodies for the jobs that are here. That's a great thing to have. At the same time, it's one of our largest challenges to try to figure out how to bring people here. And I think that's one of the things that we continue to work for and work with. For me, it's been exciting being in the position. There's a number of businesses that are starting to realize we need to be part of that whole conversation. When you look at it, we finally have, as I have said, kind of a neat convergence of the private sector businesses, the public sector, government, and education working finally together to say, okay, we've got to come to a same conclusion. And having that voice come in from the business side as well as the public side is what's been helpful. The challenge that we have is there are still some heavy hurdles. When you look at bringing people into Waukesha County or into Wisconsin, housing is always going to be probably the second number one topic right behind that workforce population. And that's something that we're trying to grapple with here. When you look at Waukesha County, we have 37 municipalities, 37 different ways of looking at housing density, multifamily housing. And we have to get people to realize we've got to get on that same page. We've seen that with education in the 17-18 school year, so we're going into the second year now, the academic career profile that the students start developing is giving them an idea of what they want to do with their careers. But we have to capture people that have already been through school and people that are in businesses right now that are seeing changes in their industry. And I think that's the challenge that we're facing right now is our workforce is going to be number-wise about what we have, but we've got to figure out how to create the skill sets for those workers to perform in the next 5 to 10 years of what the jobs are going to bring. It's shifted because we had a great run in the baby boomers who took the population and kept moving it forward. But we never looked back to say, okay, how do we prepare for the next generation? We had all this capacity for us, but we haven't put this capacity back in for them to have. And I think that's where the focus is going to be for us as we move forward, is how do we make sure that we give this generation the steps that they need to make those incremental growths that we did as we moved along the path. What you have to look at is this isn't a 10-year lookout that we're trying to get accomplished. This is something that we need to get done within the next 24 months.